Hello and welcome. On the 20th day of Olarune in the year 994 of the kingdom, the nation of Cyre ceased to exist. Not through conquest, not through surrender, but through an instantaneous transformation so complete and so horrifying that it defies explanation even decades later. In a single day, perhaps in a single moment, an entire country became a wasteland of twisted magic and lingering death. The day of mourning changed everything you thought you understood about war, about magic, and about the fragility of civilization itself. What you're about to hear is the timeline of that unstoppable catastrophe and the world that died to birth it. To understand how Cyre fell, you must first understand what Cyre was. You must see the gleaming jewel of Galifar before it shattered into the Mournland's gray ash. The nation of Cyre once occupied the heart of the continent of Corvair. Its borders touched 4 of the other original 5 nations of Galifar, making it the crossroads of the kingdom. To the north lay Canath, to the west Breland, to the south the Talenta Plains, and to the east Thrain. This central position made Cyre incredibly wealthy and strategically vital. Trade routes crossed through Cyran territory, connecting the disparate regions of the ancient kingdom. The capital city of Metral stood as one of the greatest metropolises on the continent, rivaling even Sharn in its glory and surpassing it in elegance. Cyre wasn't just geographically central to Galifar. It was culturally and politically central as well. When King Geralt ruled from his throne in the kingdom's final unified years, Cyre represented the idealized vision of what Galifar could be. The nation embraced the arts, scholarship, and refinement. Cyran nobles patronized artists, architects, and philosophers. The streets of Metral featured galleries, theaters, and concert halls. Music flowed from taverns and noble estates alike. The University of Winarn in Metral trained some of the finest minds in Corvair, producing scholars who advanced magical theory, history, and natural philosophy. The Cyran people took pride in this cultural sophistication. They saw themselves as the truest heirs to Galifar's legacy, the nation that best embodied the Old Kingdom's values of unity, prosperity, and progress. This wasn't mere arrogance, though other nations often viewed it as such. Cyre genuinely had a claim to this inheritance. When King Geralt died in 894 year of the kingdom, his daughter Mishan held the throne of Cyre. By traditional laws of succession, as the eldest child, she should have inherited the crown of all Galifar. But the other siblings refused to accept her claim. Thalin of Thrain, Roan of Breland, and Caius of Canath each declared themselves the rightful heir. Even Roger of Ondair, though he died early in the conflict, initially pressed his own claim. What began as a dispute over succession became the last war, a conflict that would consume Corvair for over a century and ultimately destroy Cyre itself. Understanding the last war is essential to understanding the day of mourning. Because the war created the conditions, that made the catastrophe possible. When the war began in 894 year of the kingdom, all participants expected a swift resolution. Each nation believed it would quickly prove its military superiority, force the others to submit, and restore Galifar under new rule. None anticipated that the fighting would last 102 years. As decades passed and the war ground on, the conflict transformed in character. Early battles followed traditional military doctrine, with armies of soldiers clashing in open fields, while wizards provided support. But as casualties mounted and resources dwindled, the nations turned to increasingly desperate measures. They developed new forms of magical warfare. They pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in combat. They created weapons and tactics that earlier generations would have called abominations. Cyre participated in this escalation along with the other nations. Despite its cultural sophistication, or perhaps because of it, Cyre possessed some of the most advanced magical capabilities on the continent. The nation's artificers and wizards worked tirelessly to create advantages on the battlefield. They crafted warforged soldiers, living constructs designed specifically for war. They developed elemental binding techniques to power weapons and vehicles. They experimented with transmutation, evocation, and necromancy in ways that blurred ethical lines. The creation forges that produced the Warforged represented one of the war's most significant magical achievements. House Cannith, the dragon-marked house that controlled these forges, maintained multiple facilities across Corvair. Cyre hosted several of these forges, including some of the oldest and most productive. The Warforged that emerged from these facilities possessed true sentience, though this fact went unrecognized for years. They fought, bled liquid somewhere between blood and oil, and died in Cyre's defense. By 994 year of the kingdom, the last war had fundamentally changed warfare itself. Armies no longer relied solely on soldiers with swords and bows. They deployed elementally powered vehicles, magical artillery, and constructs alongside traditional forces. The dragon-marked houses, which controlled various magical services and resources, profited enormously from the conflict, while officially maintaining neutrality. House Orion operated lightning rails and teleportation circles. House Lyrandar controlled the weather and elemental airships. House Cannith supplied weapons, warforged, and magical innovations to all sides. The prolonged conflict devastated the land itself. Battles scorched fields that had once produced abundant harvests. Entire villages disappeared, their inhabitants killed or scattered as refugees. Magical contamination poisoned water sources and corrupted natural areas. The war consumed resources at an unsustainable rate, leaving even the wealthiest nations struggling with shortages. For Cyre specifically, the situation grew increasingly dire as the war progressed. The nation's central location once its greatest advantage, became a strategic nightmare. Cyre faced threats from multiple directions simultaneously. Canathi undead armies pressed from the north. Thrain's forces, driven by religious fervor after the church assumed temporal power, attacked from the east. Brelan's well-supplied military struck from the west. Even the nomadic halflings of the Talenta Plains, normally peaceful, launched raids against Cyren positions along the southern border. The Cyren military fought with determination and skill, but the constant pressure from multiple fronts stretched resources dangerously thin. The nation implemented conscription to maintain troop levels. Factories converted to war production. The government diverted funding from cultural institutions to military needs. The gleaming jewel of Galifar began to show tarnish as the war ground on decade after decade. Despite these hardships, Cyre maintained its claim to the throne and refused to surrender. Queen Mishan ruled until her death, passing the crown to her descendants. By 994 year of the kingdom, Queen Danal wore the crown, though her authority extended only over the shrinking territory that remained under Cyren control. She faced an impossible situation, trying to defend a nation assaulted from all sides, while maintaining enough civilian infrastructure to prevent total collapse. The capital city of Metral remained relatively protected throughout most of the war. Its position deeper within Cyren territory and its powerful defensive wards kept enemy armies at bay. Life in Metral continued with an almost surreal normalcy, even as reports of defeats and casualties arrived daily. The theaters still staged performances. The galleries still displayed art. The nobles still held balls and celebrations, perhaps clinging to these cultural traditions as a way to deny the approaching doom. But even Metral couldn't escape the war's impact entirely. The city's population swelled with refugees fleeing from occupied territories. Resources grew scarce as supply lines were disrupted. Young people disappeared into military service, leaving gaps in families and communities. The wounded returned from the front, bearing physical and psychological scars. The war's shadow fell across every aspect of life in the capital, no matter how much the populace tried to maintain appearances. Beyond Metral, the rest of Cyre suffered far more directly. The eastern regions fell under Thrain occupation. Villages in the west were abandoned as Brelish forces advanced. Northern territories became contested ground where armies clashed repeatedly, leaving the land devastated and depopulated. Only the central core of the nation, anchored by Metral, remained securely under Cyren control by early 994 year of the kingdom. The military situation on the ground reflected this deterioration. Cyren forces found themselves increasingly on the defensive, forced to react to enemy initiatives rather than launching their own offensives. Supplies arrived irregularly. Equipment wore out faster than it could be replaced. morale suffered as soldiers realized they were fighting a losing battle for a nation slowly being carved apart by its neighbors. Yet Cyre refused to surrender or seek peace on unfavorable terms. The national identity was too tied to the claim to Galifar's throne, to the idea that Cyre represented the legitimate continuation of the Old Kingdom. To give up that claim would be to admit that everything sacrificed over a century of war had been for nothing. So the fighting continued, even as the odds grew worse and the casualties mounted. In this desperate situation, whispers began to spread about secret weapons and final solutions. Every nation pursued research into magical techniques that might provide a decisive advantage. Some of these projects remained theoretical, others reached development and deployment. The exact nature of these weapons programs remains shrouded in secrecy and conflicting accounts. But their existence is undeniable. Something or someone was developing magical capabilities that went beyond anything seen before in the war. Cyre had its own secret programs. The nation's magical expertise and the presence of House Cannith facilities provided resources for ambitious research. What exactly the Cyren government and military were working on remains a subject of debate and speculation. Were they developing a superweapon to turn the tide of the war? Were they experimenting with planar magic or extraplanar entities? Were they trying to harness fundamental forces of creation or destruction? The answers died with Cyre, leaving only questions and theories. Other nations pursued their own desperate measures. Canath had long employed undead soldiers, using necromancy to supplement its living forces. Thrain's church-led government sought divine intervention through increasingly extreme rituals. Breland, with its larger population and resources, focused on conventional military superiority, but also funded magical research. Onder, not sharing a direct border with Cyre, but still engaged in the broader war, specialized in arcane warfare and employed powerful wizards. The dragon-marked houses, despite their official neutrality, each played their own games. House Cannith's internal schism between its regional leaders reflected the broader national conflicts. The house's western branch in Breland, southern branch in Cyre, and eastern branch in Canath competed for dominance while nominally cooperating. Some evidence suggests that certain house members pursued personal agendas that went beyond simple profit or house politics. By the beginning of 994 year of the kingdom, Corvair existed in a state of exhausted stalemate. No nation possessed the strength to achieve decisive victory, yet none were willing to accept peace terms that left their rivals in positions of power. The continent had bled for over a century, and the wounds showed no signs of healing. This was the world on the verge of the day of mourning, a world so consumed by war that it had forgotten what peace looked like. The mourning of the 20th of Olarune began like countless other mornings during the last war. Soldiers ate meager breakfasts and prepared for another day of fighting. Civilians in Metrol woke to go about their business. Refugees in camps across the nation faced another day of uncertain exile. Nobody knew that this day would be different from all the others. Nobody suspected that Cyre had mere hours left to exist. Section 2. The final days, shadows before the storm. The winter of 994 year of the kingdom arrived cold and bitter across Cyre. Snow fell heavy over Metrol's spires, covering the elegant architecture in white that couldn't quite hide the wear of a century at war. The city's magical heating systems, once a source of pride, operated at reduced capacity to conserve resources. Citizens burned coal and wood when they could afford it, and huddled in communal warming stations when they couldn't. The theaters still opened their doors, but audiences were smaller now, and many seats remained empty where young people once sat before the draft took them. In the royal palace, Queen Danal Erwinarn reviewed reports that grew more grim with each passing week. The Brelish army had pushed deeper into western Cyre during the previous months, capturing towns and displacing thousands of refugees. Thrain's Silver Flame Crusaders held their positions in the east, conducting what they called purification operations in occupied territories. The Canathi border remained an active front, with undead legions probing Cyren defenses, testing for weaknesses. The Queen's advisors presented plans and contingencies, but everyone in the room understood the truth they dared not speak aloud. Cyre was losing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but through slow erosion that couldn't be stopped without a miracle or a breakthrough. The nation's military still fought with courage and skill, but courage couldn't conjure supplies that didn't exist, and skill couldn't hold multiple fronts simultaneously against enemies with superior numbers. Cyren military forces occupied defensive positions across the shrinking nation's borders. Eastern commanders near the town of Making faced Thrain's assembled forces. Intelligence reports indicating a major offensive was being prepared. These soldiers prepared for battle with the weary competence of veterans who'd fought countless times before, positioning troops to delay the anticipated advance as long as possible. In the west, Cyren forces conducted raids and ambushes against Brelish supply lines, slowing but never stopping their methodical advance. The northern front against Canath operated under entirely different dynamics. Undead soldiers didn't tire, didn't require food, and didn't break morale. They attacked relentlessly, wearing down living defenders through sheer persistence. Cyren commanders led northern defenses with arsenals of specialized weapons designed specifically for combating undead. Radiant crystals, blessed oils, and alchemical fire proved effective but expensive. Every destroyed skeleton or zombie represented resources Cyre couldn't easily replace. What made the northern front particularly nightmarish was the psychological toll. Soldiers watched comrades fall in battle, only to face those same comrades as enemies when Canathi necromancers raised them as undead. The practice violated every cultural norm regarding treatment of the dead. It broke soldiers mentally in ways conventional warfare couldn't match. Military leadership instituted mandatory rotation schedules, pulling troops off the line after extended exposure to prevent complete psychological collapse. Behind these military lines, civilian life continued with the stubborn persistence of people who had known nothing but war for generations. In Metral, bakers still rose before dawn to prepare bread with flour stretched thin by whatever additives could be found. Shopkeepers still opened their doors. Merchants still conducted business, and families still maintained the rhythms of daily life because the alternative was admitting defeat. These were people clinging to normalcy in a nation whose days were numbered. The University of Winarn remained open despite faculty shortages and dwindling student enrollment. Professors taught magical theory to drastically reduced classes. Most young people of university age served in the military or worked in war industries. Those few who continued their education were exempt due to physical disabilities, family connections, or specialized talents the government deemed too valuable to risk on the battlefield. The lectures on ritual construction and magical theory continued as they had for decades, a small defiance against the chaos beyond the university walls. In the industrial districts, House Cannith's workshops operated at full capacity. The southern branch of the house, with its ancestral seat in Cyre, maintained multiple facilities throughout the nation, the largest concentrated in Metral and the city of Making, where creation forges produced warforged soldiers alongside conventional weapons and magical implements. Merrick's de Cannith, leader of the house's southern operations, oversaw these operations with intense focus on innovation and production efficiency. The Warforged themselves represented a profound moral question that Cyrean society had largely ignored during the war. These constructs possessed genuine consciousness, individual personalities, and emotional capacity. They learned, adapted, and formed relationships with organic soldiers. Yet the law classified them as property rather than people, tools rather than beings. Some Warforged accepted their role as soldiers without question, viewing service as their purpose. Others began questioning the nature of their existence and the ethics of their creation. These philosophical stirrings went largely unnoticed by their creators, who saw only useful weapons in the fight for survival. Within House Cannith's walls, research continued on projects that went beyond standard Warforged production. The exact nature of these projects remains contested, obscured by destruction and deliberate secrecy. Evidence suggests experiments with improved Warforged designs and investigations into planar binding techniques. What is certain is that House Cannith pursued aggressive magical research in Cyre during the final months before the Day of Mourning. Multiple accounts mention unusual shipments arriving at secure facilities. Workers at these locations signed strict non-disclosure agreements under penalty of magical enforcement. Security increased around certain workshops, with house guards turning away even high-ranking government officials. Something significant was happening, though whether it related to the coming catastrophe remains an unanswered question. The Cyren government conducted its own secret programs independently of House Cannith. This research division investigated magical theories and applications specifically for military advantage, exploring possibilities from weather control to planar interaction. The classified nature of these programs means details remain scarce, but the broader pattern is clear. Cyre, like other nations, pursued desperate measures in hopes of achieving breakthrough that might alter the war's trajectory. As Olarune progressed, tensions within Metral began rising in subtle but noticeable ways. Prices increased in markets as merchants anticipated further supply disruptions. Lines at government assistance centers grew longer as more refugees arrived from lost territories. The city guard broke up fights with increasing frequency. Violence born from stress and desperation rather than genuine animosity. A malaise settled over the population, a sense that something fundamental was about to break. The Warforged noticed changes in their treatment as well. Organic soldiers became more willing to send Warforged units on dangerous missions while preserving human troops. Officers gave increasingly perilous orders with the implicit understanding that construct casualties mattered less than living ones. Some Warforged accepted this as reasonable prioritization. Others began forming their own conclusions about their value and their rights. Discussions held quietly in barracks away from organic ears. On the morning of the 20th of Olarune, Cyren military forces occupied their usual defensive positions. Near the city of Making, troops prepared for the anticipated Thrain offensive. Intelligence suggesting a major push toward Metral itself was imminent. In the west, raiding parties conducted operations against Brellish supply depots, achieving tactical successes that changed nothing about the strategic situation. The Northern Front remained relatively quiet that morning, Canathi forces having withdrawn slightly after intensive attacks, apparently regrouping for another push. In Metral, Queen Danel attended a council meeting with her senior advisors. The agenda covered routine administrative matters, resource allocation, and diplomatic correspondence. The discussion proceeded with the formality and procedure that characterized government operations. Everyone following established protocols, even as the nation crumbled around them. It was business as usual in a nation that had hours remaining. House Cannith's Metral workshops operated on a normal schedule that morning. Artificers arrived for their shifts, activated creation forges, and began the day's production quotas. In the secure research wing, a select group of specialists continued work on classified projects under heavy guard. No records survive of their specific activities that morning, and all personnel working in those facilities died in the catastrophe hours later. Whatever they were doing, whether it connected to the day of mourning or was simply unfortunate coincidence, became one of history's many unanswered questions. Across Cyre, approximately 1 million people went about their lives unaware that those lives were about to end. Children attended schools in Metral. Farmers tended fields in rural regions. Merchants conducted business. Soldiers maintained their positions. Refugees in camps hoped for eventual return to their homes. The disabled and elderly received care in hospitals and hospices. Criminals sat in prisons awaiting trial or serving sentences. The entire complex machinery of a nation in decline continued functioning through sheer momentum. Everyone playing their assigned role in a society that had hours remaining. The morning progressed toward noon, with nothing to distinguish it from countless other mornings during the last war. Combat occurred at various points along Cyre's borders. Small clashes and skirmishes, typical of an active war zone. Supply wagons moved along roads. Lightning rail trains transported passengers and cargo. House Orient teleportation circles transferred important messages and high-value goods. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. Everything was about to end. Section 3. The Cataclysm Unleashed. Noon approached across Cyre on the 20th of Olarune. Cyrean soldiers finished their midday meal and returned to their positions along defensive lines. Near making, military forces scanned the eastern horizon for signs of the anticipated Thrain offensive. The sky appeared unusually still, clouds frozen in place as though painted on canvas. These small oddities went largely unnoticed, attributed to natural weather patterns rather than warnings of approaching doom. At approximately 1/4 noon, subtle anomalies began manifesting across Cyre, though accounts of these early signs remain scarce and difficult to verify. Based on the few survivor testimonies that exist, we can infer that magical items may have flickered slightly, their enchantments wavering before stabilizing. Animals might have exhibited unusual behavior, the kind of restlessness creatures sometimes display before natural disasters. A handful of individuals with heightened magical sensitivity could have experienced headaches or vague feelings of wrongness they couldn't articulate clearly. The Warforged, with their constructed nature, may have been particularly sensitive to building energies. Their unique connection to magical forces could have allowed them to perceive disturbances that organic beings missed entirely. Whether any Warforged reported these sensations to their commanders, and whether those reports were taken seriously, remains unknown. All Warforged stationed in Cyre's interior perished in the catastrophe that followed. At approximately noon, the catastrophe began in earnest. The exact point of origin remains unknown and hotly debated. Witnesses from neighboring nations reported seeing effects that varied by their vantage point, some describing a brilliant flash of light, others a sound not heard, but felt that seemed to come from everywhere simultaneously. What is certain is that destruction started somewhere within Cyre and expanded outward at tremendous speed. For those at the epicenter, death came instantaneously. Bodies simply ceased to exist, vaporized by energies that left no remains to identify or mourn. Entire military units disappeared between one heartbeat and the next. Villages evaporated, leaving not even foundations behind. The land itself bore scars of the catastrophe. Earth transformed in ways that defied natural explanation. As the destruction radiated outward, effects varied in horrifying ways. Living creatures caught in the mourning were either killed or transformed. Based on later expeditions into the Mournland, we know some victims experienced deaths where their bodies merged with their surroundings, flesh fusing with stone as they tried to run, creating frozen monuments of final moments. Others transformed in ways that left them neither truly alive nor properly dead, twisted into forms that shouldn't exist. The devastation wasn't limited to a single battlefield. The rolling hills to the east of what would become known as the Field of Ruins transformed into a plateau of jagged glass. To the north, a chasm opened in the earth, glowing with a cold purple light that persists to this day. A choking fog erupted across central Cyre, spreading with the catastrophe itself. Near making, military forces on both sides died equally. The field where Thrain's forces had been marshalling for their invasion became the Field of Ruins. Every single soldier and general killed that day. The devastation consumed friend and foe without distinction, erasing military units from multiple nations in moments. The destruction moved faster than anyone could flee. Lightning rail trains attempting to escape found their routes blocked or destroyed, tracks warping as the catastrophe overtook them. Teleportation magic failed catastrophically, either refusing to function entirely or producing results that suggest the magical infrastructure of Cyre was collapsing. Those who tried using their own magic to escape often fared no better, their spells interacting unpredictably with the energies consuming the nation. House Lyrandar operated an airship above eastern Cyre when the catastrophe struck. The vessel had been transporting military supplies when disaster began below. Witnesses from Thrain, watching from across the border, reported seeing airships caught in the catastrophe's effects. What happened to these vessels and their crews remains unclear, though it's reasonable to assume they shared the fate of everything else caught within Cyre's borders that day. In Metral, the first sign of catastrophe came as communications from eastern regions suddenly ceased. Sending stones went dead mid-message. Scrying attempts failed to establish connections. House Orion's teleportation circles stopped functioning. Operators reporting that destination points couldn't be located, as though those places had ceased to exist. Officials initially assumed magical interference from enemy action, unable to conceive of what was actually occurring. Queen Danal Erwinarn was in Metrol when catastrophe struck. She perished along with approximately 1 million other Cyrans that day. Her death eliminated Cyre's leadership and the royal line's direct continuation, leaving Prince Orjev as the highest-ranking survivor of the Erwinarn family. He'd been outside Cyre's borders when the catastrophe occurred, conducting diplomatic business that saved his life while his nation died. The House Cannith workshops in Metrol and Making, including the creation forges that produced Warforged, were destroyed along with everything else. Merix de Cannith, leader of House Cannith's southern branch, perished in the catastrophe. His death eliminated one of the house's most influential figures and created a power vacuum within Cannith's leadership structure that contributed to the house's later schism. Whatever projects were underway in secure facilities, whatever research might have been connected to or caused the day of mourning, was lost with the workshops and everyone in them. Across all of Cyre, approximately 1 million people experienced death in countless variations that day. The exact timeline of how long the catastrophe took to consume the entire nation remains uncertain. Some accounts suggest it happened within minutes or hours. The transformation was swift enough that fleeing proved impossible, yet slow enough that those not at the epicenter may have had moments of awareness before their deaths. The Warforged suffered alongside organic beings. Their constructed bodies offered no special protection against whatever forces destroyed Cyre. Based on what salvagers have found in the Mournland since, we can infer that Warforged experienced destruction and transformation similar to living creatures, their bodies destroyed or twisted into new forms. Whether their unique nature meant they experienced these deaths differently than organic beings remains a question without answer. As the destruction reached Cyre's borders, something unprecedented occurred. The catastrophe stopped, not gradually fading, but halting abruptly at the national boundaries, as though encountering invisible walls. A dead gray mist rose along these borders, forming a wall that marked the new boundaries of what had been Cyre. This mist wall rose over 100 feet into the air and formed a canopy above the entire region, preventing direct sunlight from reaching the transformed land below. The mist wasn't simply atmospheric phenomenon, but possessed active properties, thick and cloying at the borders, separating the Mournland from its neighbors. Strong winds occasionally part sections of the mist briefly, but these breaks don't last long. The mist barrier proved dangerous to approach. Those who tried to enter found it resistant, pushing back despite its gaseous appearance. Those who forced their way through discovered the mist itself could be deadly, though effects varied unpredictably. Most who entered never emerged at all, lost forever in the gray barrier or the transformed land beyond. From outside Cyre's former borders, witnesses watched the catastrophe unfold with incomprehension and terror. Thrain's soldiers preparing for their offensive suddenly found themselves staring at a wall of mist where their enemy's nation had been minutes before. Initial reactions ranged from confusion to celebration, some believing this represented divine judgment from the silver flame. But celebration quickly turned to fear as the magnitude of what had occurred became clear. In Breland, Western armies paused their advance as the mist wall appeared before them. Military commanders dispatched scouts to investigate, receiving reports that Cyre had simply stopped existing. The land beyond the mist showed signs of catastrophic transformation. No survivors could be found. No responses came to shouted questions or magical communication attempts. Canath's northern forces witnessed the mist rising and initially assumed some form of magical defense had been activated. Undead, soldiers sent to probe the barrier entered the mist and ceased functioning, their animating magics disrupted or destroyed. Living commanders watched their forces disappear into gray fog and never return, not even as corpses that could be reanimated. None of the neighboring nations understood what had actually occurred. They couldn't conceive that an entire nation had been destroyed so completely and so suddenly. Initial theories suggested massive magical attacks, experimental weapons detonated, or divine intervention. The truth that Cyre had simply ceased to exist proved too enormous to accept immediately. In Onder, despite not sharing direct borders with Cyre, the catastrophe registered on magical sensors that monitored Corvair's thaumaturgic activity. Royal wizards detected a surge of energy unprecedented in recorded history, emanating from Cyre's location. The readings defied normal classification, showing signatures that matched no known magical school or effect. The dragon-marked houses responded with alarm and mobilization. House Canath's southern branch, headquartered in Cyre, went silent completely. Merrick's de Canath's death eliminated one of the house's most influential figures. House Orion lost multiple teleportation operators and facilities. House Lyrandar suffered the destruction of airships and other assets in Cyran territory. Every house with operations in Cyre found themselves suddenly and permanently cut off from significant resources and personnel. As the first day after the catastrophe ended, Corvair found itself facing a mystery that demanded explanation, but offered none. The day of mourning had destroyed Cyre utterly, leaving only the Mournland in its place. 1 million people were dead or transformed into something worse. An entire nation had been erased. The last war, which had consumed the continent for over a century, suddenly seemed less important than understanding what had happened and preventing it from happening again. Within days, preliminary peace negotiations would begin. Within 2 years, the Treaty of Thronehold would officially end the war. But in those first hours after Cyre fell, everyone simply stared at the mist wall and tried to process the impossible. Section 4. Aftermath and Revelation. The hours immediately following the catastrophe passed in stunned paralysis. Military commanders along Cyre's borders maintained defensive positions while sending frantic reports to their respective capitals. Nobody understood what they faced. The mist wall defied conventional military thinking. You couldn't flank it because it surrounded the entire former nation. You couldn't bombard it because projectiles either dissolved upon contact or passed through harmlessly, only to vanish in the gray interior. You couldn't negotiate with it because it wasn't an enemy force, but a phenomenon. Survivors from Cyre's interior were devastatingly rare. Those who managed to escape the catastrophe and cross the mist barrier bore physical marks of their passage, transformations that proved universally fatal. The mist itself was deadly, and most who attempted to cross it never emerged at all. The few who did survive long enough to provide testimony painted a consistent picture of the moorland's interior. Reality had broken in fundamental ways. These testimonies, taken while survivors lived, described landscape that bore scars of the catastrophe. Entire regions transformed into alien terrain. The dead vastly outnumbered any who escaped, most killed instantly, but others trapped in states between life and death. Something about the land itself felt wrong, as though the very nature of the place had been fundamentally altered in ways that defied normal understanding. The refugee situation demanded immediate attention, despite the small numbers who survived the catastrophe itself. Thousands of Cyrean citizens had been outside national borders when the day of mourning struck. Merchants conducting trade in other nations, diplomats stationed abroad, soldiers on detached duty, students studying at foreign universities, and civilians who happened to be traveling all found themselves suddenly without a homeland. These refugees represented a tiny fraction of Cyre's former population, but still constituted a significant humanitarian crisis. Different nations responded to Cyrean refugees with varying degrees of compassion and pragmatism. Breland, under Queen Borinel's leadership, established refugee camps and offered asylum. The camps clustered near the Mournland border, housing thousands in temporary shelters that quickly became permanent communities. Conditions varied from adequate to dire, depending on funding and local attitudes. Some Brelish citizens welcomed the refugees, offering assistance and employment. Others viewed them with suspicion or hostility, blaming them somehow for the catastrophe or resenting resources devoted to their care. The largest refugee community formed in a settlement called New Cyre, established in Breland with Queen Borinal's explicit support. The community occupied land near the Mournland border, close enough that residents could see the mist wall from elevated positions. Prince Orjev Erwinarn, the sole surviving member of Cyre's royal family, assumed leadership of New Cyre. He'd been outside Cyre conducting diplomatic business when the catastrophe struck, sparing him from his nation's fate, while Queen Danel and the rest of the royal line perished. His survival provided Cyren refugees with a symbol of continuity, someone who represented what they'd lost. Prince Orjev holds court in New Cyre, considering himself a king in exile. Though resources are scarce, New Cyre remains a symbol of hope for many refugees who dream of someday reclaiming their homeland. The settlement serves not just as housing, but as a preservation of Cyren culture, identity, and the claim that Cyre still exists in spirit, if not in territory. Thrain's response to refugees proved more complex. The Church of the Silver Flame initially viewed the Day of Mourning as divine judgment against Cyre. This theological position complicated refugee assistance, as some clergy argued that offering aid contradicted divine will. However, more moderate voices within the Church prevailed, arguing that compassion for the suffering aligned with the Silver Flame's teachings, regardless of theological interpretation. Thrain established smaller refugee communities, though conditions there proved harsher than in Breland, with religious conversion pressure and stricter oversight. Canath accepted few Cyren refugees, viewing them primarily as potential security threats or labor resources. Those refugees who entered Canathi territory found themselves subjected to intensive scrutiny and often pressed into service for the state. The Canathi government, still adjusting to the loss of their southern neighbor and enemy, prioritized stability and control over humanitarian concerns. Onder maintained neutral but cautious policies towards Cyren refugees. Small communities formed in Ondarian territory, primarily composed of skilled professionals or those with connections to local power structures. The Ondarian government viewed the refugees as potentially useful sources of information about Cyre's final days and any secret programs the nation had been pursuing. The dragon-marked houses responded to the crisis based on their own interests and philosophies. House Canath faced the most severe internal disruption, having lost its entire southern branch leadership and most facilities when Cyre fell. Merix de Canath, leader of the southern branch, perished in the catastrophe, along with the House Patriarch, Sterin de Canath. This loss eliminated some of the house's most influential figures and created a power vacuum within Canath's leadership structure. The house's western and eastern branches engaged in immediate power struggle over who would control the vacant southern territories and remaining assets. This internal conflict, combined with the loss of the Patriarch, left House Canath unable to represent a unified front when the Treaty of Thronehold later mandated the shutdown of creation forges. The divided house eventually formalized its split through the Sharn Accords, which divided House Cannith into 3 administrative regions, each overseen by a baron. This schism dramatically weakened what had been one of the most powerful dragon-marked houses. House Olarune focused on establishing new transportation networks around the Mournland, rather than through former Cyren territory. Lightning rail lines that had crossed Cyre required complete rerouting. Massive infrastructure projects that took years to complete. The house's teleportation services adapted more quickly, establishing new waypoint circles in territories adjacent to the Mournland. House Lyrandar shifted airship routes, avoiding Mournland airspace after vessels that attempted overflights suffered catastrophic failures. The skies above the Mournland proved as dangerous as the land below, with the canopy of dead gray mist creating a barrier that extended upward as well as horizontally. House Jorasco, which specialized in healing, provided medical services to Mournland survivors and refugees. Their healers quickly determined that conventional magic proved largely ineffective against injuries and conditions caused by exposure to the Mournland's energies. They documented these limitations extensively, contributing to growing understanding that the catastrophe had introduced entirely new forms of harm that defied traditional treatment. This knowledge proved both valuable and deeply troubling, suggesting the Mournland represented a permanent alteration to Corvair's magical landscape. Military forces along the Mournland border maintained heightened alert status while transitioning from combat operations to containment and observation. The immediate threat of Cyren military action had vanished, but the Mournland itself posed unknown dangers. Creatures emerged from the mist, occasionally twisted things that had once been animals or people, but now existed as predatory abominations. These Mournland monsters attacked without apparent reason, driven by hunger or pain or simple malevolence. Border patrols engaged these creatures regularly, developing tactics for combat against enemies that didn't follow normal biological rules. The first organized expeditions into the Mournland began within weeks of the catastrophe. Every nation wanted information about what had happened and whether anything of value could be salvaged from the ruins. These initial expeditions uniformly ended in disaster. Groups that entered the mist either failed to return entirely or emerged with catastrophic casualties. Survivors from these early expeditions reported conditions even worse than initial accounts had described. The land actively resisted intrusion, terrain shifting to confuse navigation, hostile creatures appearing without warning, and the very air itself seeming to drain life and sanity. Early expeditions reported that the Mournland seemed to possess a kind of malign awareness, though whether this represented genuine consciousness or merely the chaotic interaction of broken magical laws remained debatable. Obstacles appeared to block progress deliberately. Creatures seemed directed to intercept intruders. The land reacted to presence in ways that suggested intention rather than random chance. These observations, while impossible to verify objectively, appeared consistently enough in multiple independent accounts to warrant serious consideration. Failed expeditions led military and government leaders to reassess their approach. Direct investigation proved too costly in lives and resources. Instead, observation posts were established along the Mournland border, maintaining constant watch for changes or threats emerging from the mist. Magical scrying attempts continued despite limited success, occasionally providing glimpses of the interior before the energies scrambled detection spells. These fragmentary observations confirmed that conditions inside remained catastrophically dangerous, with no signs of improvement. The political landscape of Corvair transformed in the months following the Day of Mourning. The last war, which had consumed the continent for over a century, suddenly seemed pointless and dangerous. If Cyre could be destroyed so completely, other nations faced similar vulnerability. The catastrophe provided motivation for peace negotiations that had been impossible, while all parties believed military victory remained achievable. Nobody won the last war. Cyre lost absolutely, but victory had proven impossible for everyone else as well. Preliminary peace talks began within months after the Day of Mourning. Representatives from all major nations gathered in neutral territory to discuss terms. The negotiations proved contentious, decades of warfare having created deep animosities and conflicting territorial claims. But the specter of the Mournland hung over every discussion. Diplomats who might have walked away from talks instead forced themselves to find compromise, driven by fear that continued warfare might produce another catastrophe. The Treaty of Thronehold, signed on the 11th of Arith in 996 year of the kingdom, formally ended the last war and established new political realities. 2 years had passed since Cyre's destruction. 2 years of negotiation and compromise that reshaped Corvair's political map. The 5 nations that had fought for succession became 12 recognized nations. Breland, Thrain, Canath, and Onder retained their territories with some border adjustments. New nations formed from regions that had achieved independence during the war. The Eldine Reaches, Silargo, Dargun, Vaelnar, Cubera, the Talenta Plains, the Lazar Principalities, and the Emror Holds all received formal recognition. The treaty included specific provisions regarding the Mournland. No nation could claim former Cyren territory. The devastated land was acknowledged as unclaimed territory under no government's authority. This provision prevented immediate resumption of hostilities over Cyre's corpse, though it satisfied nobody completely. One controversial treaty provision addressed the Warforged. These constructed soldiers had fought throughout the last war without legal rights or recognition as people. The treaty granted Warforged legal personhood and freedom, ending their status as property. All functioning Warforged held as property within any thronehold nation were declared free, with governments required to recognize and maintain their freedom. At the same time, the treaty banned creation of new Warforged and outlawed the creation forges operated by House Cannith. This provision faced strong opposition from interests who had profited from Warforged labor and military service. Based on accounts from the treaty negotiations, the original draft may have ordered that all Warforged be destroyed, with their emancipation representing a compromise achieved through serious lobbying by sympathizers who'd worked with Warforged over the wars. The primary intention appears to have been eliminating standing armies, with personhood rights being a secondary consideration. The newly freed Warforged faced uncertain futures. Many had known nothing but military service and struggled to find purpose in peacetime. Some joined mercenary companies or adventuring groups, continuing to fight because combat was familiar. Others sought peaceful occupations, learning trades, or pursuing interests they'd never been allowed to explore. A significant number made pilgrimage to the Mournland, drawn to the place where so many Warforged had been created and destroyed. These pilgrims established camps near the border, creating communities of former soldiers seeking meaning in the aftermath of war. New factions emerged in the post-war landscape, organizations responding to changed circumstances. Cyren refugees formed groups dedicated to discovering what had caused the day of mourning and potentially reclaiming their homeland. Some of these organizations combined investigation with militant action, conducting unauthorized expeditions into the Mournland, and occasionally causing diplomatic incidents when they targeted foreign interests they believed connected to the catastrophe. The Church of the Silver Flame experienced theological crisis over the day of mourning. Some clergy insisted the catastrophe represented divine judgment, confirming Thrain's righteousness in the last war. Others argued the destruction of an entire nation, including countless innocents, couldn't align with any benevolent deity's will. This disagreement fractured the church, creating reform movements that questioned Thrain's government and its claim to divine mandate. Academic institutions across Corvair established research programs focused on understanding the day of mourning and the Mournland's nature. The University of Winarn, having been destroyed with Metrol, reformed in exile with surviving faculty and refugee students. Morgrave University in Sharn became a center for Mournland studies, collecting testimonies, analyzing physical samples, and sponsoring expeditions. These scholarly efforts produced theories, but few definitive answers, the catastrophe proving resistant to conventional investigation methods. Everyday life gradually resumed across Corvair, but the day of mourning's shadow remained. Every nation lived with awareness that catastrophe could strike without warning. Parents told children stories about Cyre as cautionary tales about war's consequences. Artists created works memorializing the lost nation, paintings and songs and poems attempting to capture what had been destroyed. The anniversary of the 20th of Olarune became a day of mourning indeed, observed throughout the continent with varying degrees of solemnity and sincerity. In New Cyre, Prince Orjev maintained his government in exile, clinging to hope that someday Cyre might be restored. He kept court as though he ruled more than a refugee settlement, maintaining traditions and protocols of a nation that no longer existed. Some viewed this as dignified preservation of culture. Others saw it as denial, refusal to accept reality. But for many Cyren refugees, Orjev's continued leadership provided comfort and continuity in a world that had taken everything else from them. Section 5. Eternal Questions and Living Legacy. The decades since the day of mourning have produced countless theories about what caused the catastrophe. Each nation, each faction, each scholar approaches the question with their own biases and agendas. Some seek truth, others seek justification for predetermined conclusions. All face the same fundamental problem: insufficient evidence. The Mournland guards its secrets behind walls of churning mist and deadly terrain, refusing to yield answers to those who ask. The most prevalent theory blames Cyre itself. This explanation suggests that Cyren researchers, whether government-sponsored or House Cannith affiliated, developed a superweapon intended to win the last war decisively. The weapon detonated prematurely during testing or activation, destroying the nation it was meant to save. This theory appeals to those who find comfort in assigning clear cause and effect. Weapons sometimes malfunction, experiments go wrong. The tragedy becomes comprehensible, a cautionary tale about hubris and playing with forces beyond control. Evidence supporting this theory remains circumstantial but suggestive. Multiple accounts confirm that Cyre conducted classified research programs in the years and months before the catastrophe. House Cannith operated secure facilities where projects proceeded behind magical wards and armed guards. The Mournland's epicenter, though difficult to pinpoint precisely, appears to lie near Making, where major military installations and research facilities were concentrated. Based on what we know of the last war's escalation, it's reasonable to infer that nations pursued increasingly desperate magical research as conventional warfare proved indecisive. However, this theory faces significant challenges. No concrete evidence proves Cyre possessed such a weapon or even pursued its development beyond typical wartime research. Classified research doesn't necessarily mean superweapon construction. Nations conduct secret military programs routinely without creating devices capable of destroying entire countries. The theory also requires assuming Cyren researchers were simultaneously brilliant enough to create unprecedented magical effects and foolish enough to test such a weapon without adequate safeguards. Alternative theories shift blame to other nations. Some argue that Thrain, Breland, or Canath developed the weapon that destroyed Cyre, either intentionally targeting the nation or suffering their own catastrophic malfunction that happened to center on enemy territory. These theories appeal to Cyren refugees and sympathizers, providing external villains to blame, rather than accepting that their own nation might have caused its destruction. But evidence supporting foreign weapon theories proves even weaker than evidence for Cyren development. Thrain's most zealous Silver Flame adherents promote a divine judgment theory. They argue that the Day of Mourning represented the Silver Flame's punishment for Cyren's sins, divine intervention demonstrating which side held righteousness in the last war. This theological explanation requires no evidence because faith supersedes empirical proof. The flame acted, Cyre fell, righteousness prevailed. Critics point out that divine judgment killing 1 million people, including children and innocents, contradicts most definitions of justice. Supporters counter that divine will transcends mortal understanding, and questioning the flame's actions itself constitutes sin. More esoteric theories invoke extraplanar involvement. Scholars of the planes note that the Mournland exhibits properties consistent with planar overlap or intrusion. Perhaps Cyren researchers attempted to harness energies from another plane and accidentally created a breach. Perhaps entities from beyond Eberron found ways to manifest in the material world, choosing Cyre as their entry point. Perhaps the catastrophe resulted from planar convergence, multiple planes overlapping in the same space with reality unable to sustain the stress. These theories could explain the Mournland's bizarre properties, the way physics and magic behave inconsistently. But they require accepting that planar barriers can fail so catastrophically. The Draconic prophecy provides another framework for interpretation. This cosmic pattern, readable in dragon marks and celestial alignments, supposedly predicts and influences major events. Some scholars argue that the Day of Mourning fulfills prophecy, an inevitable event written in the patterns of creation itself. Based on what we know of how the prophecy functions, it's conceivable that certain verses were fulfilled that day, whether through deliberate action by those who study the prophecy or through natural convergence of events. If true, this could mean no single weapon or accident caused the catastrophe. Instead, reality itself demanded Cyre's destruction to fulfill larger cosmic narratives. One particularly intriguing variant suggests that dragons of the chamber deliberately caused the mourning as part of a necessary chain of events to prevent the release of an overlord. The dragons in Eberron have a precedent for causing worldwide disaster in order to stop out of control magic. Given their role as students and manipulators of the draconic prophecy, it's conceivable they might sacrifice a nation to prevent a greater catastrophe. However, no direct evidence supports this theory, making it pure speculation based on what we understand of draconic motivations. Another perspective considers involvement by the Lords of Dust, servants of the demon overlords imprisoned millennia ago. These Rakshasa work tirelessly to free their masters, manipulating events across centuries. This theory suggests the Lords of Dust either deliberately caused the mourning to further their goals, or saw the magical calamity as a necessary event that needed to happen to ensure an overlord's eventual release. The lack of evidence makes this theory impossible to prove, but the pattern fits what we know of how the Lords of Dust operate. House Cannith faces persistent accusations regardless of which theory proves true. The house's presence in Cyre, its classified research, and its creation forges all appear in circumstantial evidence chains. Some accusers claim Cannith deliberately caused the catastrophe, either pursuing prohibited research or conducting experiments that knowingly risked disaster. Others argue Cannith bears responsibility through negligence, pursuing profit and innovation without adequate safety consideration. Merix de Cannith the Younger, son of the leader who died in the catastrophe, inherited control over house operations in former Cyren territory. He maintains that his father's research focused on improving warforged designs and enhancing elemental binding techniques, nothing that could have caused nationwide destruction. Critics note that Merix stands to lose everything if his father's legacy includes responsibility for 1 million deaths, giving him strong motivation to deny or conceal evidence. Based on his actions since the catastrophe, we can infer he genuinely believes in his father's innocence, though whether that belief rests on knowledge or hope remains unclear. The Mournland itself continues to defy explanation and prediction. Its boundaries remain fixed at Cyre's former borders, the mist wall showing no signs of expansion or contraction over decades of observation. This stability provides some comfort, suggesting the catastrophe won't spread to consume additional territory. But it also raises questions. If the day of mourning resulted from weapon detonation or experimental failure, why would its effects stop precisely at national boundaries? Political borders hold no inherent magical significance. Yet, something caused the destruction to halt exactly where Cyre ended and other nations began. Conditions inside the Mournland have evolved over time, though never in ways that suggest recovery or healing. The initial chaos has settled into more stable horror. Terrain remains fixed for longer periods, though never permanently. Structures that once stood in Cyren cities persist as ruins, warped but recognizable. Roads can sometimes be followed, though they lead through transformed landscape that bears only passing resemblance to what existed before the catastrophe. Natural healing does not occur in the Mournland, and healing magic functions poorly or not at all. Spells of the healing subschool simply fail to work within the dead gray mist. This makes extended stays in the Mournland extremely dangerous, as injuries accumulate without the magical or natural recovery that adventurers typically rely upon. Even water in and around the Mournland carries a dark taint, contamination that has begun seeping into Lake Cyre and nearby waterways. The creatures inhabiting the Mournland represent one of its most disturbing features. Some are animals or people transformed by the catastrophe, their bodies and minds twisted into predatory forms that hunger without satisfaction and kill without purpose. These original victims of the day of mourning continue existing in states that mock life, unable to die properly, but also unable to truly live. They attack anything that moves, driven by pain or hunger or simple malevolence born from their transformation. Other Mournland creatures appear to have originated after the catastrophe, born from the twisted energies that permeate the dead land. These entities follow no natural taxonomy, combining features from multiple species or exhibiting characteristics that match no known organism. The mutated monsters that roam the Mournland seem drawn to certain locations, particularly the glowing chasm in the north, where purple light emanates from deep within the earth. Those that spend significant time near this chasm mutate further, becoming even more twisted and misshapen. Whether these creatures will eventually expand beyond the Mournland remains unknown, but border patrols maintain constant vigilance against incursions. The Warforged hold unique relationship with the Mournland. Their constructed nature provides partial resistance to its corrupting effects, allowing them to survive exposure that would kill organic beings within hours. This has led to Warforged communities establishing presence at the very edges of the mist wall, and even within the Mournland itself. Some Warforged enter regularly, scavenging materials or conducting personal quests for meaning. They return changed but surviving, their chassis marked by exposure, but their consciousness intact. In recent years, Warforged operating under the command of an individual known as the Lord of Blades have been known to operate extensively in the Mournland. This charismatic and powerful Warforged leader has established what amounts to a Warforged nation deep within the devastated territory. His enclave rises above the broken land as a beacon that gathers Warforged from all over Corvair who have grown disenchanted with life among organic races. These followers, calling themselves the Blades, roam the Mournland, patrolling the terrain and salvaging resources from the ashes of Cyre. The Lord of Blades himself remains shrouded in mystery. Some believe he is a single powerful individual, while others theorize he might be multiple Warforged working together under a shared identity. What is certain is that his movement has attracted significant numbers of Warforged who seek purpose and belonging in a world that granted them freedom, but not necessarily acceptance. The hidden stronghold deep within the Mournland serves as center for this growing community, though its exact location remains unknown to outsiders. Some warforged in the Mournland have founded a new religion, following what they call the Becoming God. These warforged search the ruins of Cyre, attempting to build a body capable of housing this deity, whether this represents genuine divine calling or psychological response to trauma and displacement remains debatable. But it demonstrates how the Mournland has become spiritually significant to warforged seeking identity beyond their original purpose as weapons. Salvage operations in the Mournland continue despite high mortality rates and limited success. The ruins of Cyren cities contain treasures and resources that survived the catastrophe intact or transformed into valuable magical materials. Professional salvagers, desperate refugees, and adventurous opportunists all brave the mist wall seeking fortune. Most die or disappear. A few return with enough loot to justify the risk, encouraging others to try their luck. This creates a grim economy where salvagers sell recovered items at premium prices, knowing each piece likely cost lives to retrieve. Certain artifacts recovered from the Mournland exhibit unusual properties distinct from normal magical items. These objects, sometimes called Mournland relics, channel energies that don't match standard magical schools. They produce effects that conventional enchanting couldn't replicate. Scholars study these relics intensely, hoping they might provide insights into what happened on the day of mourning. But the relics prove as mysterious as the land that produced them, their properties defying consistent analysis or reproduction. A loose confederation of individuals called the Mourners has claimed the Mournland as home and refuge. This group includes criminals fleeing justice, outcasts rejected by normal society, and those who find the Mournland's twisted nature somehow appealing. They've established semi-permanent camps in relatively stable regions, surviving through combination of scavenging, hunting mutated creatures, and raiding salvagers who venture too deep. The Mourners view the Mournland as theirs by right of habitation, attacking outsiders they consider intruders. Communication with Mourners proves difficult because prolonged exposure to the Mournland affects minds as well as bodies. Even those who entered with full sanity gradually deteriorate, their thoughts becoming as twisted as the landscape around them. They speak in fragments, make reference to events that may or may not have occurred, and display paranoia that might be justified given their circumstances. The anniversary of the day of mourning, the 20th of Olarune, carries profound weight throughout Corvair. Official commemorations occur in all nations, though their character varies significantly. Breland observes the day with solemn memorials, honoring Cyre's dead and the refugees who survived. Thrain's ceremonies mix mourning with elements of thanksgiving acknowledging tragedy, while some celebrate that divine judgment spared the righteous. Canath approaches the anniversary clinically, analyzing the catastrophe's military and political implications rather than dwelling on emotional responses. Onder observes diplomatically neutral protocols, offending no one while committing to nothing. In New Cyre, the anniversary transforms the refugee community into living memorial. Prince Orjev leads ceremonies that blend grief, remembrance, and defiant hope. Refugees speak names of the dead, trying to preserve memory of those who vanished without graves or markers. Musicians perform traditional Cyren songs that nobody outside the community remembers. Artists display works created from salvaged materials, transforming mournland debris into beauty. These observances serve purposes beyond mere remembrance. They reinforce Cyren identity among younger generations born after the catastrophe, ensuring the nation survives in culture and memory, even if it cannot be reclaimed in territory. The question that haunts every discussion, every theory, every investigation is whether the day of mourning could happen again. If a weapon caused the catastrophe, do other nations possess similar weapons? If an experiment failed, are other researchers conducting similar experiments? If divine judgment fell on Cyre, might other nations face the same fate? If cosmic forces caused the destruction, what prevents them from acting elsewhere? These questions drive policy decisions, military strategies, and diplomatic relationships decades after Cyre fell. Every nation publicly denies developing weapons comparable to whatever destroyed Cyre. Every government claims to have implemented safeguards against catastrophic magical accidents. Every military swears to have learned from the last war's mistakes. But trust remains scarce. The Treaty of Thronehold ended open warfare, but didn't eliminate suspicion and rivalry. Intelligence services still spy on each other. Military forces still maintain readiness. Politicians still maneuver for advantage. The peace holds not from genuine reconciliation, but from mutual fear that renewed war might awaken whatever consumed Cyre. Academic consensus, insofar as it exists, suggests multiple factors likely contributed to the day of mourning, rather than single cause. Perhaps Cyren researchers did pursue dangerous magical development. Perhaps multiple nations conducted similar research, creating resonance effects none anticipated. Perhaps planar alignments created vulnerability that weapons or experiments exploited. Perhaps the century of magical warfare so saturated Cyre with destructive energies that reality itself reached breaking point. This multi-causal theory satisfies nobody because it assigns partial blame everywhere while preventing clear accountability anywhere. The ultimate truth about what caused the day of mourning remains unknown and may stay unknown forever. The mournland keeps its secrets. The dead cannot testify. Evidence lies buried in ruins guarded by deadly terrain and hostile creatures. Survivors who might have witnessed critical moments died from exposure before sharing what they knew. Written records perished in the catastrophe or remain inaccessible in mournland depths. Every investigator faces the same fundamental barrier. The information needed to understand the catastrophe was destroyed by the catastrophe itself. This uncertainty creates space for continued speculation, investigation, and occasionally obsession. Adventurers mount expeditions seeking definitive proof of their preferred theory. Scholars analyze and reanalyze existing evidence, hoping to extract new insights from familiar sources. Politicians invoke the day of mourning to justify policies ranging from arms control to military buildup. The catastrophe has become whatever people need it to be: cautionary tale, divine judgment, cosmic mystery, or unsolved crime. For Cyren refugees and their descendants, the day of mourning remains personal tragedy beyond political or academic interest. They lost homeland, family, friends, and future in one terrible day. No explanation will restore what was taken. No theory will bring back the dead or heal the wounds that never properly close. They carry their grief forward, generation to generation, preserving memory of a nation that existed once and might, in some form, exist again. The mournland endures, gray mist churning at its borders, twisted landscape waiting within. It stands as monument to whatever happened on the 20th of Olarune, 994 year of the kingdom. 1 million souls died or worse than died that day. An entire nation ceased to exist in hours, and nobody knows why. This is the legacy of the day of mourning, an unstoppable catastrophe that changed Corvair forever and left questions that may never find answers. The mist walls stand, the dead land waits, and the mystery persists into uncertain future. If you enjoyed learning about the day of mourning and the fall of Cyre, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps create more deep dives into the lore and mysteries of the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may your own journeys never lead you into dead gray mist.